Turn on subtitles for better understanding. Moses was chosen by God to lead his people. The Israelites lived in Egypt under Pharaoh's rule, where they suffered as slaves and worked every day. Moses wanted freedom and trusted God's promise. Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites leave Egypt. God sent plagues to show his mighty power. The river turned to blood, frogs filled the land, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hard and proud. The final plague brought sorrow across all of Egypt. The firstborn sons died, even Pharaoh's own child. In fear and grief, Pharaoh told Moses to leave, so the Israelites prepared for their long journey. They left Egypt quickly. Carrying bread without yeast, families gathered belongings and followed Moses in hope. God guided them with a cloud by day and fire by night, showing the way through the desert. Pharaoh changed his mind after they had departed. He gathered his army with horses and chariots. They chased the Israelites across the desert land, and the people grew afraid and cried to Moses. Moses prayed to God for help and protection. The Israelites stood before the waters of the sea. Behind them came Pharaoh's powerful army, ready to capture them and bring them back. The people were terrified and thought they would die. They asked Moses why he had led them here, but Moses told them to trust in God, who would fight for them and save their lives. God commanded Moses to raise his staff high. He stretched out his hand over the great sea. The waters began to move with mighty force, and a path opened wide through the waves. The sea was divided into two strong walls. The Israelites walked across on dry ground safely. They hurried forward while the water stood still, believing God's power was protecting their steps. Pharaoh's army followed them into the sea path. The horses and chariots rushed after the people, but God looked down with anger at the Egyptians, and their wheels became stuck in the mud. The Egyptians shouted in fear as they struggled. They realized God was fighting against them now. Their chariots broke apart, their horses panicked, and chaos spread through the mighty army. Moses stretched out his hand once more in faith. The waters of the sea returned with great force. The walls of water crashed down upon Pharaoh's men, covering them completely and ending their pursuit. The Israelites saw the Egyptians swept away by waves. Not one of Pharaoh's soldiers survived that night. God had saved his people from their enemies, and the sea became calm once again. The people stood amazed at the mighty miracle. They had walked safely through the parted waters. Now they saw Pharaoh's army destroyed forever, and they knew God's power was with them. Moses led the people in songs of praise. They lifted their voices to thank the Lord. Women danced with tambourines in joyful celebration, for God had given them freedom at last. The Israelites continued their journey through the desert. They trusted Moses to guide them each day. God provided food called manna from heaven, and water flowed from rocks when needed. Though the desert was harsh and difficult to cross, the people remembered the sea and God's power. They knew He would protect them always, even when they faced hunger or thirst. Pharaoh's defeat was remembered for generations to come. It showed that no king could stand against God. The Israelites carried this story in their hearts, teaching their children about the mighty deliverance. Moses became a symbol of faith and courage. He trusted God even when danger surrounded him. His leadership gave hope to the Israelites, who followed him through trials and victories. The crossing of the sea was a turning point. It marked the true beginning of Israel's freedom. No longer slaves, they were now God's people, walking toward the land promised to their fathers. The miracle of the sea gave them confidence. They believed God would lead them to safety. Every step in the desert reminded them that God's hand was guiding their path. Moses often prayed for strength and wisdom. He listened to God's voice on the mountain. The people depended on his guidance daily, trusting that God spoke through their leader. The Israelites sometimes doubted and complained loudly. They feared the desert and longed for Egypt. But Moses reminded them of the sea, where God had saved them with mighty power. The story of the sea became their foundation. It proved that God was stronger than Pharaoh. It showed that faith could open impossible paths, and that God's promises would never fail. Generations repeated the story to their children. They told how Moses lifted his staff high. They described the waters standing like walls, and the people walking safely on dry ground. The defeat of Pharaoh was a lesson of pride. He refused to listen and hardened his heart. In the end, his power was destroyed completely, and his army vanished beneath the waves. The Israelites learned that freedom required trust. They had to believe in God's plan. Even when the way seemed blocked by danger, God could open a path through the sea. Moses became known as a great prophet. His faith inspired countless generations afterward. He showed that obedience to God brings victory, and that courage can change the destiny of nations. The crossing of the sea was remembered in songs. Poets and prophets spoke of God's mighty hand. It became a symbol of deliverance and hope, a story told in temples and homes alike. The Israelites carried this memory into their future. It gave them strength during battles and trials. They believed the God who parted the sea would always protect them from their enemies. Moses continued to lead with patience and faith. He guided the people through deserts and valleys. His trust in God never wavered or failed, even when the people grew restless and afraid. The sea crossing showed God's love for his people. He cared for them in their greatest need. He proved that his power was limitless, and that his promises would always be true. Pharaoh's defeat was a warning to all rulers. No king could resist the will of God. His pride led him to destruction and loss, while God's people walked free into the future. The Israelites sang of freedom and salvation. They remembered the night of their deliverance. Their voices echoed with joy and gratitude, for God had saved them from slavery forever. The parted sea became a symbol of faith. It showed that God makes a way forward. Even when obstacles seem impossible to cross, His power can open doors to freedom. Moses taught the people to trust and obey. He reminded them of God's mighty works. The sea crossing was proof of His strength, and a promise of His constant protection. The Israelites carried this faith into new lands. They built their nation on God's covenant. The sea crossing was their story of birth, a moment that defined their identity forever. Pharaoh's downfall was remembered as justice divine. His cruelty had brought suffering to many lives. But God showed mercy to His chosen people, and gave them freedom through the parted sea. The miracle of the sea inspired countless believers. It became a story of hope and courage. People learned that faith can overcome fear, and that God's power is greater than all. Moses stood as a hero of faith and strength. He obeyed God and saved his people's lives. The sea opened, Pharaoh was defeated forever, and Israel walked free into its destiny.